in starting chapter 3 of Daniel. And I've entitled it, No Strange Gods Before Me. Why does that sound familiar? No strange gods before me. Anybody have an idea? Word?
Oh, the idol worship
And I think if you look on the either in Exodus 20 and you look up the Ten Commandments,
That's one of them.
I am the Lord your God.
oh,
I will have no strange gods before me. And it's kind of like he already knew. He already knew what the people were like. He already knew that they were worshiping. I remember not kind of a surprise when you come across something in the Bible that you've read so many times and you never caught that particular part. But when I heard that throughout the wanderings, the 40 years in the desert, that the Israelites had pagan gods that they had in Egypt, and they had them in their tent. It's kind of like, I don't know that they needed to hide them, but they certainly weren't out on display. So they're saying, well, I'm watching Jehovah God manifest himself and as a what do you call it, a pillar of fire at night to light the way when he was moving the people at nighttime to which in the desert that would be the time to be walking around, not during the hot heat of the day, and a pillar of cloud during the day, right? So that was how God manifested. And he provided. Their shoes never wore out, clothes never wore out. And yet they still found it preferable to worship these pagan gods in addition to Jehovah God. And every time I say that, I'm reminded that in my one and only trip to India, because I have no desire to go back, I went to. I was in a department store, and it was like 3 or 4 stories. It reminded me of old department stores here, where one floor would be women's clothes, men's clothes, household goods, so on. But on that very first floor when I walked in, I noticed on some glass shelves were all these little statues of the different gods. There was the monkey god, there was the elephant god, there were all of these gods, and then right in the middle, as if
Just another one.
just another god, was a little statue of Jesus with his arms out. You know, you've seen those before. And I'm going, this is how the world sees it. In India, by the way, is 98% pagan. So it's not like I think the fact that they actually could have statues and schools, Catholic schools and all this other stuff is amazing that the government even allows it. But I'm thinking, he's just another god to you. It's kind of like, which god do you worship? Well, I used to worship this god. And even the little 3-wheel motorized taxis that they drive around, all have on the side little symbols. Sometimes it'll be the elephant god will be on there. I've seen some where it was a symbol of the Virgin Mary. It's just very, very interesting. A snapshot of the world. A snapshot of the world. I don't know if you've ever wondered what it would be like to live under the rule of a dictator. Well, not that Biden could be.
We are, sorry.
Yeah, we are, yeah. Who used fear and force to make the people conform to his wishes. God, can't believe how that fits. Many people have risked everything to escape from that kind of a country that had that. Why do people leave Venezuela? Why do they leave Cuba? Because they don't have that personal freedom. They're seeking something. And a lot of people would say, oh, well, they're looking for, the land of milk and honey. They're looking for a place of abundance where they, and I'm sure if where you're, the country that they live in have a shortage of everything, which I think is like what Cuba's like. Shelves are just wiped out. But you know what is more than that? They were seeking freedom. And the freedom, the ability to self-rule a republic. It's interesting that we call this country that we live in, or they're very fond of calling this a democracy. And yet, the reason why a pure, and I use the word pure, a pure democracy will never work is because a democracy is where the majority rules. We would call that mob rule. And I don't think anybody really wants that.
Where's the majority going?
Yeah, exactly. This form of government, this republic, it was unheard of throughout the world. You study world history and all, and you'll see that there were always kings running countries. There were always despots. There were dictators. Because they were accomplishing through their armies normally what they wanted by using force. Yeah, okay, I can see that. That term coup d'etat, or coup, C-O-U-P, is talking about a military takeover of a country. So if you wanna shut down the existing government and cause the leader of that government to leave in the middle of the night and go elsewhere, and use the military to shut down the airports and whatever, and shut down the radio stations and so on, then that's what they're going to do. So here's the reason why I bring all this up is King Nebuchadnezzar had reached the pinnacle of what he wanted in life, or the pinnacle of his stardom. He had everything, and he was the ruler of the known world. But as you remember, he had a dream that caused him great anxiousness, anxiety. And Daniel, one of the youths that were taken from Judah, along with his 3 friends, as well as thousands of other people, prayed to God for an interpretation of the dream. And we know what led up to this. When the king received the answer that he wanted, which was, what did the king want to know? Well, but he wanted to know two things. He wanted to know,
What the dream was.
tell me what my dream was, and then two, tell me what was the meaning of the dream. So if you were like these wise men who said, "Oh, king, live forever. Just tell us."
And
What
we'll
you-
interpret.
Yeah, and we'll give you an interpretation. And he says, no, I'm on to you guys. We're not going to play this game. If you're going to prove to me that you really have the insight given by the gods, then you can tell me. He's really setting, well, he was setting them up. But it's don't you think that he maybe had some doubts about what the gods were able to do? Because they would all, with the Egyptians, it was the sun god. And, when the king received the answer, when Daniel came forward and told him, having received it in a vision that night, he was very grateful.
More than grateful, he fell on his face before Daniel, prostrate before Daniel. This is an amazing thing, and then when
Considering
you're
who he was.
yeah, and what you go into after, how quickly people
Yeah.
forget.
He was full of pride. He had a moment of humility. And he saw what was going on. Now, it doesn't tell us how long the period of time was between when he got the answer and fell face down and before Daniel, and when he decided in his little fertile mind that he was going to erect this statue 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. So at some point, he ordered the construction of a gold image 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. That's verse 1. I can't help but think, because remember the head, in his dream, the head of gold represented him. He was the head of gold. He was, and Daniel made sure that he told him, and you didn't receive your power and your majesty from your armies. You received it from God. So you need to kind of, put that inside your brain and whirl it around a little bit. So, what was the purpose of this statue? It seems a little out of sorts. Did the king have some kind of grand plan? Well, I would imagine before you had some commission, something that big to be built, yeah, you'd have a grand plan. Next, the king summoned all of his officials, his governors, his advisors, his judges, his magistrates, and many others to be present for the dedication of the image, verse 2. So they all assembled in front of the image, verse 3. Now, we don't have a person with this position of being a herald. Isn't there a Christmas song, Hark the Herald Angels Sing? The angels were proclaiming. They were heralds. A
Those are the
herald.
people that would stand out in the towns ringing bells, declaring things.
Yeah, they would, or telling the news or whatever too.
Here you
The
hear
British are coming. The British are coming.
Yeah, really.
pizza.
Uh, it gave us the answer that, it really gave us the answer that we were looking for. In other words, what was the reason for the golden image? So, tell us, what happened? What did the herald have to say? And this is in verse 5.
Glory to the newborn King.
This is what you are to do. This is the herald speaking. As soon as you hear the sound of many instruments playing, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar set up. That's all. No matter where you are, you hear the music, you fall down and worship the image of gold. And we know that where there is a law or a command, there's usually a consequence for disobedience. Isn't that how we dealt with our kids and our grandchildren? If we're trying not too hard to be their buddies. Here's what the rules are. Well, we used to say to Marge's grandchildren, there are rules at Grandma's house, and there are maybe rules in your house. I don't know. But when you're here, you're under Grandma's rules. So, and you know what? It didn't take them long to, they're smart. They knew. They knew. In this case, the consequences for disobedience were very extreme. This is in verse 6. And how extreme was it?
Oh, what he said.
Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace.
Look at that.
Fear has always been a great motivator. Wouldn't you agree? In world history, we've seen it in dictatorships or communism, where the state becomes the ruler. And everybody but the elite have to obey. Leaders will use the use fear to control people. And usually it appears to work pretty well, at least on the short term. Now the king is going to see what will happen. This is going to be his test run, because they haven't done this before. This is the dedication. So, this is in verse 7. As soon as they heard the sound of the instruments and all kinds of music, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language fell down and worshiped the image of gold. They how does that go? It's better to go along in order to get along. I think that's how that goes. Which is not true. I mean, there's a certain point where you have to say what I believe in, my ethics. Here's the line in the sand, and I'm going this far and no further. I'm not going to do this.
Well, that's the misunderstanding of faith, is people think that ideally you view the world through the lens of what you believe, not what you believe through the lens of the world.
Yeah, exactly. You may have noticed that God's people, the Jews, have always been hated.
Yeah.
They even have a word for that, anti-Semites. And it usually involves jealousy. They always seem to, have a real talent for working with money, the bankers, businessmen. And that's bound to make somebody jealous. If they weren't doing well, then nobody would be paying attention to them. They usually kept to themselves and were the only ones, and now we're talking about in this day, they were the only ones that were worshiping one God. Worshiping one God was kind of unusual to the pagans because why would you only have one God?
Silly Gentiles.
Look, we've got hundreds of gods. And it was jealousy that caused the astrologers to come forward and denounce the Jews. Because in verse 8, we're told that the astrologers went to the king and said, these Jews are not doing what you want them to do. They're not bowing down to your statue.
We're stubborn people.
Yeah. And then, of course, as most people would do, they reminded the king, because the king's maybe got short-term memory loss or something. They reminded the king of his decree concerning the worshiping of the golden statue. Of course, that also spoke of the punishment for disobeying.
Oh, yeah.
But their motive became very clear when they singled out Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Their bosses.
Verses 8 through 11. Yes. The astrologers had always been envious of their positions and power. After all, they were foreigners. And I don't know what the king did. It was crazy. He gave them, he made them administrators through all these different districts and areas of Babylon, which was a huge place.
Probably had to do with the money collecting, because they're good at that.
Yeah. And it was Daniel, by the way, as you recall, it was Daniel that asked the king, "O king, I think it would be really wise if you were to take Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and use them to administer throughout your kingdom. And I'll stay here in the, I was going to say temple, it's not temple.
Palace.
In the palace, thank you. That was what, and of course, he had, and we have the benefit of hindsight, right? We can look at the Magi that came from the east, and they knew about the King of the Jews. They knew about the conjunction of the three stars that formed the one bright star that led them through the sky.
Interesting, it's 3 stars too.
Yeah. So I think Daniel had a real impact. The 3 Hebrews were accused of not paying attention to the king's commands. They neither served his kings, or his gods, nor worshiped the image of gold that he had set up. So it was not just the statue. They didn't worship their gods either. This is almost like a B movie kind of thing where you got Simon Legree tying, what was her name, to the railroad track? Little Eva or little something.
Yeah, along came Jones.
Yeah.
Along came Jones.
These astrologers knew how to push the king's buttons to get what they wanted. They knew what made the king tick. And anybody that was a threat to his kingdom, to his power, they knew he wasn't gonna put up with it. But you would think that the king would have been a little bit smarter than that. Like, if you're being accused of something, don't you, at least, I don't know what their courts of law were like, but you'd have the opportunity to speak, to tell your side of the story. Well, they couldn't back out of the fact that they didn't worship the gods. And they certainly didn't bow down to the image of gold. It makes you wonder what's going on in Nebuchadnezzar's mind. Do I want complete control over the hearts and minds of people, and that's why I'm having them do this? I want to see just how far I can push them. He didn't say this is a statue of me. I mean, nowhere does it say that that's what they were bowing to.
I find it interesting that the whole statue was gold. It's kind of like he was making an attempt to overcome the dream by saying, you know, that my kingdom's going to go on forever because I made this statue. The gold goes from the top to the bottom.
Yeah, no silver, no bronze. No.
Yeah. Okay, let's do our last song. Okay.